Hi, this is Mike at Triple Water Astrology. This podcast regards Hades, the second in order of orbit of the 8 hypothetical Transneptunians. It's a cool, fun topic. So I want to introduce Hades. As his name implies, he can be very tough, and he's one of the malefic of the Great 8, of the hypotheticals. His symbolism includes muck, waste, garbage, poverty, and manipulation. So some very sinister, ominous types of keywords and symbolism associated with Hades. But he has, of course, a different side, a more productive side. He is concerned with past lives, catharsis, alchemy, and even with wealth, contrasting the poverty idea. So he has a very earthy symbolism. His glyph contains the cross of matter, and while he could be associated with poverty, he is also, ironically or maybe paradoxically, associated with riches. But I think that has more to do with the alchemy type theme, in that the discovery and the richness of developing yourself, or some scenario such as that is what the wealth is referring to, although it could be literal, precious metals or monetary wealth. Anyhow, he takes about exactly 1 year to transit 1 degree through the heavens. He retrogrades like all the other Transneptunian points and planets, regular planets, of course. So he moves slowly, and bear in mind that I use a 1 degree orb for Hades and the hypotheticals, and sometimes I go outside that, but not very often. Hades, he's not necessarily to be feared, but I think his dire warning for us is that if a person intentionally misbehaves and then keeps doing that, then Hades can really come back to haunt them. And I've followed a few cases like that. So Hades, he's demanding and deserves some caution. And to be sure, I'm sure he can show up in various unhappy situations. I think the complexity of it would be very involved. That would fit Hades well. Anyhow, I did some checking into Hades, and I wondered if he's active in destructive mundane events. So it's interesting to see some charts where Hades, he was not active, for example, in the Hiroshima or Nagasaki nuclear bombing events. That involved Pluto, and Sun in Leo was close to Pluto and Leo on both of those days. So that's the chart. A lot of those event charts center around Pluto, actually, but I couldn't find Hades as active in those events. I have a suspicion that the MLK assassination would involve Hades, and I'll cover that with another assassination event in the 60s a little bit later here. But I believe Hades would surface in the MLK assassination event, but I didn't see that in the event chart, and I don't have birth data or a rectification for MLK that I know of. So the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination event, I can't conclude that Hades is involved with that, influential with that. I looked at the World Trade Center bombing in 1993 and could not find an active Hades in that event chart. However, the 9/11 event has a very active Hades, and the 2 Kennedy assassinations, JFK and RFK, that I've researched also center around a very active Hades influence. So it was about 2013 or 14 when I happened to be at work, and there was a 9/11 memorial service, and I believe it was a person. He was in the fire department from New York City, and he was actually at the 9/11 event, and he gave kind of a moving presentation. And at one point he was describing it, and I got this kind of horrified look on my face, and he looked straight at me, and kept talking and he looked at me for 15 or 20 seconds. So it was a very well done presentation, and I think that in itself was kind of a Hades moment for me. Maybe I was stirred up a little bit and shifted my perspective a little bit and changed a little bit. And I think Hades is really about subtlety. So he's not about sudden transformation, a permanent alteration like Pluto. Hades is more like a surgeon or an auto mechanic. Hades takes the whole system or whatever he's working with and subtly manipulates a small part of it. And indeed, that changes the entire system or simply restores it. Again, you could think of a surgeon or maybe an auto mechanic working their own types of alchemy. So anyway, I wanted to talk about the 9/11 chart first. Again, that had a very influential Hades. Hades happened to be in Gemini in 2001, and on that day, Hades was at 21 Gemini. Now, that event chart on September 11, 2001, 8:46 a.m., New York, New York, that has ascendant set at 14 Libra, so Venus rules the chart. Now, Venus is a rough outlet for a yod formed by Sun, Transneptunian Vulcanus at the base, and then a yod pointing to Uranus in Dominion. So I would have to stretch the orbs to create that yod, because Vulcanus makes an exact 150 degree aspect to Uranus, and Sun doesn't, which is okay. But Sun and Venus do not exactly aspect Vulcanus. So anyway, that would be an effective way to begin the analysis of the chart. But today I'm more focused on Hades. Hades is at 21 Gemini, and he makes a trine well within a 1 degree orb to Uranus in Dominion. Uranus himself is very noteworthy in the 9/11 chart. He's in his own sign, and he's retrograde. So Uranus is already a planet of extremes, and his retrograde also says that he has a kind of all or nothing condition associated. So he's very, very far out on that day. And what's also interesting is Apollon. Apollon, the hypothetical Transneptunian, is at 21 degrees of Libra. So there's a very strong airy grand trine going on. And again, if you care to stretch the orbs, Venus, chart ruler Venus at 18 Leo, is the focal point of the kite pattern going on with Uranus, Hades, and Apollon, forming that airy grand trine. So anyway, that's the first point I wanted to make with Hades. He has a direct association with Uranus, a shocking event, tragic event, and he's also associated or making a nice aspect, perfect trine to Apollon. Apollon is a multiplier, and in this case he's the idea of 2. He literally has that in his glyph. Combination of Jupiter and Gemini, 2. So the Apollon influence is saying that there's 2 towers involved. Uranus is saying it's a very shocking event, and Hades is saying how sinister it is. Now, Hades himself is in the 9th house, and it's very important to note the 9th house for Hades, because this describes the sinister event having been planned by someone or a group of people who are not native to the United States. They're from another country. So that describes part of the 9th house influence, and I believe the fact that airplanes were involved could also be a 9th house influence. In other words, traveling a distant ways to make the attacks. And then there's a third critical element going on with Hades. Saturn and Moon are flanking Hades. Saturn is at 14 Gemini, and Moon is at 28 Gemini, and Hades is at the exact midpoint of Saturn and Moon. So that sinister event, again, has kind of an alliteration to the idea of two. Not only is Hades in Gemini, again, that's two towers, the idea of two, but you have the masculine Saturn and the feminine Moon flanking Hades in the same sign in Gemini, the idea of two again. So there's Gemini, the masculine and feminine denote two. Saturn is very earthy, so that denotes physical structures, and then the Moon is a very emotional planet, of course, so that describes the sad nature of the event. And then Hades as the midpoint describes, again, the combination of the two, and what happened is very sinister. So that's the beginning of describing Hades in the 9/11 chart. And I think that very effectively shows that Hades was active in the mundane event and part of the unfortunate manifestation. So I wanted to also quickly cover the JFK assassination chart. The first thing I noticed about that chart is Hades in that event chart, November 22nd, 1963, 12:30 p.m. in Dallas, Texas. Hades is making an exact square to the Moon in Aquarius. So right away we have Moon in Aquarius, we have Saturn in Aquarius, and we have Ascendant in Aquarius. Moon and Saturn are pushing on the Aquarius Ascendant, so we have Uranus ruling the chart, and then Hades is involved because he's making an exact square to the Moon. Now, where have we seen that before? Hades was at the midpoint of Saturn and Moon in Gemini in the 9/11 chart. So we have kind of a repeat in a different way, a different iteration of a tragic event involving Hades, but also Saturn and Moon are influential. So Hades not only is making a perfect square to the Moon, he is forming an earthy grand trine with the South Node in Capricorn and vertex in Virgo. Usually I only use conjunction and opposition with the vertex, but I'll go with it. I'll go with vertex as part of the grand trine in this case. It seems to describe the event very well. The bullets that were fired could be associated with vertex, and then Hades describes the sinister event, and South Node and Hades are both associated with the past. So past actions of various people seem to be very involved in this assassination chart or event, and then the earthy element, of course, is involved with the physical death of a president. And we have Chiron as opposite vertex, but that's kind of a different story. Anyway, vertex is still active, is what I'm saying. And then we have a yod pointing to Uranus. So Uranus is very active, and Chiron is the outlet of the yod. I think the symbolism of that is obvious, but you can read my article on my website if you want more information. And then of interest, we have North Node in Cancer as the outlet of a kite pattern involving Hades, South Node, and vertex. So the shocking event, this shocking sinister event, the suddenness of it, is very karmic, and we know that because the moon's nodes are involved. That's the karmic axis. And then the outlet of the kite pattern is the North Node at 11 Cancer. So what we're seeing is North Node is future direction, and the Cancer sign symbolizes the United States. So that signifies a sudden change in direction of the entire United States due to an assassination event. And I also wanted to cover the RFK assassination. Now you'll notice I believe transiting Hades right now is at 11 Cancer, so that's transiting over the assassination event, North Node, which would also be interesting to do some analysis. So we have the RFK chart. Now RFK, the event chart, when RFK was assassinated on June 6, 1968, 12:15 a.m. Los Angeles, California, we have the event chart does not necessarily reveal what happened. However, regarding Hades, it certainly is instructive regarding what happened, but Hades is not active in the event chart. However, what we find out is when we look at RFK's natal promise and his progressions, Hades suddenly becomes very active. So this sinister event involving a second Kennedy that was assassinated, he was a hopeful for becoming a president. So it was a very tragic day that at that time for RFK, very dangerous. And we can see that for several reasons, and a lot of that involves Hades. So transiting Hades in Taurus was making a perfect square to RFK's progressed moon in Leo. So progressed moon itself could symbolize RFK at that time in his life, a very prominent, wealthy person running for high office. Progressed moon in Leo. And that's squaring Hades in Taurus. So Hades had moved several degrees forward since his brother's death, but it actually created conditions at that time that put RFK in grave danger, and clearly he was assassinated, unfortunately. Progressed vertex for RFK, again, we have an active vertex was opposite transiting Hades. Now where have we seen that before? Vertex, Hades, moon? And then, if that wasn't enough, a natal Saturn in RFK's natal promise, natal Saturn, progressed moon, and transiting Hades were forming a T-square. So we have kind of a very eerie situation where we've seen 3 times from these 3 analyses, we've seen the moon, Saturn, and Hades involved. And then if you looked back at I haven't done so, but if I looked back at the vertex for the 9/11 event, that actually moved between the time the first plane hit the first tower and then the second plane hit. I'm eyeballing it, and I don't believe that makes a difference, but like we saw, we could perhaps use different orbs or different aspects other than conjunction and opposition for vertex. And for example, Neptune is squaring vertex, which is symbolic in the event chart. However, I'll leave that for another day. So I hope that gives listeners a good overview of Transneptunian Hades. Again, I don't think he should be feared, but he's something to consider. Everyone has Hades in their natal promise. I happen to have Hades in my 7th house, so I like looking at aspects to Hades when I'm looking at a natal chart, or even in synastry. That gives me a lot of information if I see Hades active in synastry. And then when you look at Hades, another good way to start is looking at your natal promise and that house position for Hades. Thanks for listening, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and like my video.